Namaste and greetings. I, Trupta Behra, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. We are gathered today for day one of an online international autumn school program, a 1-month immersive online intermediate certificate training course on contours of the public policy in India in the Amrit Kaal. This training program is organized by IMPRI, Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE. At the very outset, let me give you a brief background on this certification course. This course is specially designed to impart relevant analytical concepts and skills to the participants concerning various elements of India's public policies in a coherent manner. The resource persons have been carefully selected to provide a high level of expertise to be delivered with nuance and balance. Topics range from enhancing competence in public financial management, designing public policies to achieve citizen-centric outcomes, science, technology, judicial and police reforms, managing India's urbanization, balancing environmental goals with other goals, and implications of India's demographic trends for pension and healthcare, among others. This course goes a step further from the introductory level with the contours of public policy in India and its warrants, caveats, facets, and its impact. In this 1 month, participants will gain a unique understanding of the complex challenges of contemporary governance from a variety of perspectives, such as economics and agriculture, foreign policy, urban management and policy, climate change, environmental policy, and disaster management, the role of media and civil society, and contemporary threats such as feminism in policy making. This provides the tools and know-how to comprehend and handle India's critical public policy issues. This course will be conducted by expert resource persons comprising civil servants, politicians, civil society activists, professionals, and academics. The course hopes to deliver expanded thinking and enhanced understanding to be able to make formidable contributions to public policy. This course will be chaired by Professor Mukul, Visiting Distinguished Professor IMPRI, former Professor Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, NUS. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
The panel of conveners comprises of Dr. Devendra Singh, Senior Visiting Fellow IMPRI, Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director IMPRI, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director IMPRI. The experts for this course include Mr. V. Ramakrishnan, Professor Shobhit Mathur, Ms. Urvashi Prasad, Professor Aman Agarwal, Dr. Soumyadeep Chattopadhyay, Mr. Prakash Singh, Mr. Harsh Gupta Madhusudan, Mr. Yash Agarwal, Professor Chetan Vaidya, Professor Sachidanand Mukherjee, Mr. Ashish Chandorkar, Professor M. Govind Rao, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, Dr. Radhika Pandey, Ambassador Shashank, and lastly, Professor Anil K. Gupta. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding emerging issues pertaining to the Indian subcontinent and helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful policy research and action. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping announcements once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Kindly share your questions in the Q&A box The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise and refrain from making any general comments in the question in order to save time. Now, without further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Professor Mukul Asher to start the program with his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Namaskar. Dhanyavad. Uh, let me share the screen, please. And let me see. Okay. We have today the first half an hour for the overview of the program. And then we will have Sanjeev Sanyal's address, inaugural address to us for 1 hour. And then last half hour again, we'll go to the orientation of the program, go through each topic, and I'll explain the rationale as to how it is put together. But before we do that, let's take some time to understand the overview and the larger context. Let me see. I'm not. Okay. So context, relevant thoughts, public policy in the Amrit Kaal is what the program has been titled. What is Amrit Kaal? Amrit Kaal for India is 2022 to 2047, when India will complete 100 years of independence. This period is considered auspicious in the Indian civilizational ethos. So Amrit, everybody knows, Amrit Manthan, and the Kal is, of course, the period. So this is a period where India has very ambitious goals, but those cannot be achieved unless there are certain changes that occur in the society. So this is what I'm going to briefly Let me give you some select data sources. Handbook of Statistics on the Indian Economy by RBI every year. Every year. RBI's state finance, the only large-scale study on state finances published every year. And there is India Stat on statistics on India. So always keep this available and look up the data rather than assuming something. I get surprised sometimes when I actually go there and my priors are not supported. It is useful to start with some thoughts that are relevant to focus our attention. I will start with Sanskrit. Ano Badra Kratavo Yantu Vishwata. What does it mean? In Hindi, सभी दिशाओं से ज्ञान को आने के लिए अपने मस्तिष्क को खुला रखें. In English, it means that to get knowledge from all directions, keep your head, mind open. So do not be rigid, do not close your mind. And that is very, very important for the realizing Amrit Kal's goals. Second thought, your degree is just a piece of paper. The degree is starting. Your education is seen in your behavior, how you behave. A lot of people with no formal degree behave in a way that is so refreshing and so elevated. And many with high degrees behave in a very um, inconsiderate, uncivilized manner. The Amrit Kaal, the Prime Minister has said, I am the first Prime Minister to be born in free India, that is after 1947. And that's why my thought process, my conduct, what I say and do is inspired and influenced by my country's attributes and traditions. I derive my strength from it. This is a mindset change, and I'll elaborate on it as we go along. In Amrit Kal, in today's very complicated geopolitical world, where we have digital economy and digital, the information economy, AI, other technologies, the while policies are there is also a battle for narratives. So you have to be good as public policy analyst, as public policy person, um, that you are able to participate and set narratives, counter narratives that are not constructive. So there will be narratives designed to damage us. As India is rising, we are seeing now George Soros and all the things that are coming out, there will be narratives designed to damage us. We have to put out narratives designed to expose those and put our viewpoint across. I think we will, Dr. Jayashankar. So this is where we have to be very careful in terms of the not only conducting public policy, but retaining the public support. Rajiv Chandrasekhar just said, the minister, that misinformation is a big, big challenge for good public policies. Now, what are some of the new areas? I'll be very brief here because we'll have a whole course. First is greater self-confidence as a nation. The era when progress was equated with westernization is now behind us. And many the traditions, others that were suppressed, languages that were suppressed during the colonial era are once again finding a voice on the global stage. So trend in the global order is gradually creating greater multipolarity. And if it is to develop faster, it is essential that there is also cultural rebalancing. So notice, to succeed now, these cultural issues are important as well. Asserting that globalization does not mean uniformity, Jayashankar, while delivering the speech at the 12th World Hindi Conference in Denaru Convention Center in Nadi, Mauritius, said only by understanding and accepting the diversity of our world that we can do full justice. Okay. By the way, those, just as a trivia, in the world, Chinese is spoken by 1.2 billion people, about English 1.1 billion people, Hindi 620 million people. Okay, so Hindi is a uh, is a language to be reckoned with. So I already said that battle of narratives that we need to do, and the word oikophobia in all its dimensions captures this new thinking that is needed, new self-confidence of India. Oikophobia is a Greek word, oikos, house. household. Plus phobos means fear is an aversion to a home environment or an abnormal fear, phobia of one's home, and also a tendency to criticize or reject one's own culture and praise other cultures. Okay. I mean, when I was young, I was guilty of it too. Didn't realize that oikophobia is what I was suffering from, and I need to get out of it. So this is as a country very important that we imbibe the word oikophobia and um, try to see that we don't suffer from it. So that's the first one. Self-confidence, not hubris, self-confidence. Keep your everything open for none to come in, knowledge to come in. And the oikophobia is something we should be uh, aware of and, address, tackle. Second, the contour that we are talking about is how do we think of India? Before we were thinking, oh, India is a poor country. I'll have students in my class, they say, oh, India, third world country, and so on. So this is a kind of mindset, but that mindset has to change in Amrit Kaal. India is progressing towards a middle class society. And I'll give you some numbers. India is increasingly becoming an urban society. India doesn't live in villages anymore. So that rural emotional attachment, fascination, that has to be restructured as well. And India will be moderately aging by 2040, though it will have demographic advantage in comparison to its key competitors. So public policies should be geared towards that, towards those aspirations, and so on. And so you in public policy, you do ease the living conditions of people and also meet aspirations. So plan that those aspirations are met. Now let me give you some data. This is the India household asset ownership. US 11 trillion is our household assets in India. Property is half of it. Gold 16%, bank deposits 14, insurance and so on 5.9, provident pension fund 5.8, cash 3.4, and the equities in the share market is 4.7. So it's approaching 5%, which means that the stock market behavior affects a large number of households and people. Now, this is the India's equity ownership in the stock market. So in stock market, our stock market capitalization is 3.5 trillion US dollars. So the promoters and so on, they own 50%, foreign institutions 19, retail investors, people like you and me, own 10%, domestic mutual funds 9%, domestic insurance banks 6%, other 7%. So we will own through the domestic insurance banks and so on. So some of the shares indirectly. So we have to see that it is still a promoter-driven market, but we are diversifying the sources. Now here is the India's changing income mix. Why do I say we are middle class? Where do I get this from? This is from Business Standard newspaper, and it says income pyramid. Notice they divide it between destitute, aspirer, middle class, and rich. And this is when the end of Amrit Kaal, 46, 47. So we will have the destitute declining. Already they are low. India has a great success in reducing poverty. We don't have extreme poverty now. Destitute will decline from 196 to 25 million. Aspirer will decline from 732 to 184, but the middle class will almost triple from 432 million to 1,015, and the rich from 56 to 437. So if you put these two numbers together, we are justified in calling India middle class society. So we are progressing, and that 47 is not that far away. This is not a done deal, of course. You have to work for it. And some of the things we are going to talk about in the course, I hope that we can change ourselves and our public policies as well. This is Standard Chartered report by India by 2030. Now, one of the things that caught my eye was that in 2030, states with per capita GDP of greater than 4,000 US dollars will be nine states. They are not naming the state, but the and the household consumption expenditure will be 3.4 trillion. The per capita income will be 4,000, but many will have higher than that. GDP will be 6 trillion by 2030. So what are they attributing good parts to it? Consistent policy reform, macro stability, healthy external financial sector, large share of working population, digitization, and political stability. This two slides after this captures where we are, where we want to go. So this is the GDP in 2023. US is 26.9, China 19.4, but India is 3.7. So Germany and Japan are at the moment ahead of us. We'll soon take over, go ahead of them, and will be the third largest economy by 2030. But what is really interesting is the next slide, which gives you data or projections rather. These are not done deal again, for 2050. Now, what does it say? It says US, China will be the largest, 41.9, US 37.2, but India 22.2 trillion as a GDP. Now, we can't have 22.2 trillion GDP with old thinking. That's why we got to have new thinking, and that's where we have titled it as Contours of Public Policy. And notice that the after India 22, the next is Germany at 6.2. Huge gap. These three countries will tend to dominate the global GDP of $227 trillion by 2050, according to these projections. Again, not a done deal. Now, I said, think of urbanization. This gives you the idea as to where India's population is. Notice the coastal area, Ahmedabad, Surat, Mumbai, Bangalore. Bangalore is not quite coastal. Chennai, Visakhapatnam, and so on. These are all on the coast. They are heavily, densely populated, but the real density is over here, right? And this is where we need to, there is Kolkata as well, density. So here is where we need to pay more attention, Patna to Delhi. And thankfully, UP is doing well, it's growing, and that augurs well for managing. And we are doing more and more for urbanization and urban infrastructure, the metros, others that are coming up. I said that we will have favorable demographics. This one gives you the working age population as a share of total population. Notice that India will still be fairly ahead, and China and Japan and Korea will have much lower share of working age population. The implication is the lower the share, the more population aging you have, and it is difficult to get innovations. Younger population is needed, so we will age, but we'll still have relative edge compared to our rivals. Okay. Third, using technology to achieve scale and efficiency and global competitiveness. We saw Chandrayaan, and by the way, most scientists that were involved in Chandrayaan are non-IIT. They come from regional engineering colleges, others, and so on. So this is very, very important. And the Nari Shakti was very evident. So this is what we have to tap. So now we have plans. We have mission to the moon, uh, plan for exploring deep seas, Samudrayan soon. India's tech as a public good is scalable, replicable across the world, second largest smartphone producer from no smartphone production 15 years ago. Reliance Retail is now the top 100 among the top 100 retailers in the world. So this is very, very good. In 2008, we were the world's most unbanked. Now we are among the most banked. Technology scale. The price of data is falling exponentially. India has got the cheapest competitive price of data, and that is through technology. So there are a lot of India's major tech production hubs that are coming up. Uh, Data center capacity is increasing, particularly in Mumbai. Uh, so the rise of Mumbai is reinventing itself. It is becoming a service center like the data center and other parts. So the Mumbai of old with textile mills and all that is not going to be there. The other technology part is that the defense sector to dump Microsoft Windows to replace with indigenous Maya OS with Chakravyuh. Now that's confidence, that's technology, that's Atmanirbharta. A lot of that will need to be done. Fourth is improving data quality and timeliness. So the numerical and statistical literacy increasing needed for public policy stakeholders. A question to ask before forming an assessment or opinion is, how do I know what I know? My sources reliable? Is there something that I need to do? And Shamika Ravi has written a very nice piece on how our sampling of our data that needs to be improved. Okay, so I've given you a quick uh, uh, sort of background to now for the program. And let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dhanyawad. Namaste.
Thank you so much, sir, for your opening remarks. I would now like to invite Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal. Dr. Sanyal is currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister and Secretary to the Government of India. He was the Principal Economic Advisor to the Finance Minister for 5 years till February 2022. An alumnus of Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi, Dr. Sanyal later attended Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He has had many affiliations, including being a visiting scholar at Oxford University, an adjunct fellow at Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, London, visiting professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and senior fellow of the World Wildlife Fund. He is also the author of a number of best-selling books, including Land of the Seven Rivers, The Ocean of Churn, India in the Age of Ideas, and the India Renaissance. He co-authored and edited 6 economic surveys of the Government of India between 2017 and 2022. He has also published over 200 articles and columns in leading national and international publications. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you among us today. We welcome you.
Pleasure to be here. Now, why don't I ask you, how would you like me to do this? Are you going to do this as an interactive session, or would you want me to speak for a while? What would you like me to do?
So you can speak for a while. Yeah. Mukul sir, do you have any suggestions?
No, I leave it to Sanjeev.
Okay. Hi, Professor Asher. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Good to see you.
I am very well. So give me a sense of what the audience is like, then I'll tailor it to that.
So sir, most are working professional, working in different government, corporate and other settings, and a lot of students also, masters, undergrad students.
Okay.
But it's an intermediate course, so not very fundamental, but a level up. So
Okay. So the topic that I wanted to speak about was relating to basically decision theory and how to deal with uncertain situations, and the importance of using feedback loops in order to make decisions and make particularly policy decisions when you're dealing with extremely uncertain systems. Now, in order to understand what I am talking about, you need to understand what I am contrasting it with. You see, much of decision-making that happens, or at least the frameworks that are taught and end up being done, tend to have this view that we live in a world where even if there's not entire certainty, but certainly that you can apply probabilities to future outcomes, and therefore your decision tree is a matter of sort of trying to maximize expected utility by taking that various outcomes, putting some probabilities to them, and sort of working it out. Now, this is very useful if you are doing a classroom exercise, or behavioral economists like Kahneman and Tversky, etc., are doing these puzzles and trying to work out how human beings make decisions. But in fact, very few decisions of any consequence can be made like this. Certainly not at a policy level, or in any large system. Even decision makers who are running large companies, or even in personal life, making decisions about, for example, how to, what job to take, what career to take, whom to marry. None of these decisions can be meaningfully made using a decision tree, because there is no way of placing any kind of probability or even listing out the possible outcomes that can happen. Because we live in a very, very uncertain, churning world where the future is almost impossible to tell. I mean, who knows what the implications of AI are? Who knew at the beginning of COVID how the COVID would play out to be? How do we know how a city will be in 20, 25 years' time? So, given that it is not possible to know how things will pan out, you can't even imagine in some cases how things will be. How do we take decisions? This is really the topic that I'm going to talk about. Now, in order to understand this, I need to first distinguish between risk and uncertainty. This is something that's not new. Frank Knight, going back to the 1930s, had made this distinction. Others have since then made this distinction again, but I'm going to make it anyway. And this is that almost much of academic literature on risk relates to risk. And essentially what risk is are things that are a possibility, and you are able to apply some probability to it. But as I pointed out, the real interesting things where decisions need to be made are relating to things that are uncertain. And they are uncertain in the sense that it's not possible to work out all the various things that can happen. And it's simply impossible to put any probability what is going to happen, because there's just too many moving parts. And this is really when you make decisions or the important decisions that need to be made for policymakers. This is really the crux of it. This is not about collecting more and better data. No matter how good the data is, no matter how good your econometrics is, all of this is largely pointless when you're dealing with uncertainty. So what do you do under those circumstances? So I'm going to illustrate the issue through something live, which I myself was a party to that, which is the way in which decisions were made during the period of COVID in India. So as you are aware, India made a very different approach to dealing with COVID than virtually every other country. And let me show you how it feels to be in the boiler room trying to make these kinds of decisions, so that you will appreciate what I am trying to say. So let's go back to the March of 2020. COVID had started. We knew that something bad had happened in China. We also knew that whatever it was had spread to northern Italy and was killing a lot of people. However, neither China nor the WHO was giving us clear information about what was happening, why it was happening, what was the nature of the bacteria, virus, etc., whatever it was that was causing it, and so on and so forth. So here we are with complete uncertainty about what the problem is. We have no idea why it's happening. People who may have information in it are simply not sharing the information and may even be deliberately misguiding us. So what do you do? So like most other governments, India too called in the experts. So we called in epidemics experts to ask them what to do. Now you will remember yourselves the range of possibilities that were presented to us. So there were a bunch of people who said, no, this is nothing much more than a bad flu. And then there were a bunch of people who said, oh my God, there are millions of people who are going to be dead by July. This is going to be worse than the Spanish flu. Now, faced with this range of possibilities, what do I do as a Indian policymaker, particularly when I know that I have 1.4 billion people, and whatever direction, whatever strategy I take, once I have taken it, I can't actually change strategy. If you're living in Singapore or some small country with a lot of resources relative to the population, maybe you have a chance of changing direction. But India has no chance of direction. If you go with something, you have to go with it. I mean, quite apart from the changing direction becoming difficult with politics, you also have the administrative capabilities and all kinds of things. And of course, there is the other problem that once this thing spreads into the wider population, we have no way of actually figuring out how to deal with it, because it will spread like wildfire. And if it turned out that the pessimists were correct, then we would have a disastrous situation. Now, every other country in the world faced this decision problem as well, and different countries took different approaches. So, for example, China went for a zero COVID policy. So they shut down everything, and that's how they went about it. Sweden went for a completely open Swedish policy. You remember that. The British originally went for herd immunity, and Boris Johnson made an announcement, but then it quickly changed its mind and opted for a lockdown type policy, and so on and so forth. So different countries did different things. But what were we going to do in India? Now, what we decided was to actually go for something called a barbell strategy. Now, barbell strategy is something derived from derivatives strategies in the financial markets. Well, basically what you do when you're faced with utter uncertainty, you combine two opposite strategies. And As a result of that, you make your way through into the darkness. So what we decided is that on one side, we were going to actually iterate and try to do Bayesian updating to try and work out how to deal with uncertainty, i.e., as more information became available, we would update our way into the future. It's a process of iteration rather than trying to predict where it was going, because nobody seemed to know where to go. But at the same time, you create handrails or safety nets in order to avoid the very worst possible outcomes. So in the very beginning, you will remember, we were one of the first countries in the world to impose a full lockdown. Now, many people at that time, and later on, everybody did a lockdown, but because we were one of the first, and certainly the largest country to do a full lockdown, we came under a lot of criticism. But this is exactly what you should expect to do in the first round of an iterative process. When you have no information, then you should do a full lockdown so that some time can pass so that you can gather information for the first round of iteration. So basically what you do is you create the first safety net is don't completely shut down the system. Now remember, it is not the case that we who are managing the system did not know that it is devastating for the economy. Of course we know. It doesn't require too much imagination to know that. But we needed time to figure out what's happening. Now, after about a month of being in this lockdown, we figured out, first of all, that it was spread by a virus. Secondly, by this point, we began to get decent information that it killed older people with comorbidities and so on. It didn't kill children. By the way, that was a very important finding for us, because the last thing we wanted is, discover that it killed children and then get our next generation completely wiped out. So although it was very bad for older people, in some ways it was a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, we were creating systems for quarantining, systems for testing, and then, of course, ultimately starting the process of doing the vaccine program. So as we got better information, we began to slowly open it up. And you will remember we opened it up very significantly as we went along with time. Because why? As we became better and better at doing this, we were able to open things up. Now, the same thing we did with the economy. We shut it down in the beginning, but then we kept opening it up through an iterative process. And you will remember that we kept having, every few weeks, we would, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman would do a conference call or a press conference. And in that, she would announce a series of measures. Now, people were at that time very, very annoyed that we were doing these regular changes in policy. Well, that's the only way you can do it. When you do not know what the long-term policy is, the long-term situation is, you do not go out there and have this grand plan and use up all your ammunition, fiscal and monetary, in trying to do something when you have no idea how long this whole thing is going to last. So if you remember, we were actually quite restrained about using our resources. Instead of using all our resources in trying to do a Keynesian style demand expansion, we took the view that this was actually a supply side shock. It wasn't the case that people didn't want to spend money. People wanted to spend money, but we were stopping them from spending money by stopping them from going to the restaurants, the malls, shutting down the system. So we saw this not as a demand side problem at all, but as a supply shutdown. And we said that, look, when you got a supply shutdown, if you're going to try and pump demand, basically it's the equivalent of pressing the accelerator when your foot is on the brake. All you'll get is an overheating. So when the other countries were going and giving out stimulus checks and doing massive monetary expansion, we were very, very restrained in all of this. And of course, you will remember, we were criticized quite a lot for doing that. But that doesn't mean we didn't recognize the impact of the shutdown. And even as we opened things up, there were still lots of restrictions. And of course, sectors like tourism, etc., are devastated. So what do you do? So our approach, because we had a supply side worldview, our approach was quite different. We did not attempt to revive the economy by pumping demand. Instead, we did something totally different. We created safety nets of various kinds. So what are those safety nets? First of all, we use the Jan Dhan Jam Trinity in order to make sure that the very poor were given small amounts of money. So they were given some 6,000 rupees a month or something. Now we knew that this is not going to revive the economy. And many people said, oh my God, only 6,000 rupees per family or whatever is not going to revive the economy. Hey, we know that. We're not attempting to use this to revive the economy. This is a safety net just to make sure that everybody has got some cash. Then we made food available to 800 million people. Again, just make sure nobody starves. It's not that everybody of those 800 million people turned up for the food. It was just happened to be available because so it's a safety net. We did the same thing with industry. So there was a lot of fear that there would be this cascade of defaults coming through. Because one person doesn't pay another person, who doesn't pay another person. And this is particularly true for MSMEs, which, don't very often very thin on working capital. So what would happen then is that essentially one group would default and they would cause the next group to default, and then ultimately you'll end up all with the banks. This is one of the major reasons why everybody was giving out stimulus checks in the rest of the world. In India, on the other hand, what we did is we guaranteed the payments of the entire system up to 80%. So what happened is that everybody knew that the other guy, when he defaults, the government will pay up 80%. So in fact, what happened is very, very few people actually defaulted. And so we kept the entire financial system alive, spent very, very little money to do it. But the whole system was kept alive. So note here how a supply side worldview coupled with safety nets took us down a completely different path in which we were continuously iterating and changing along the way. And then when finally things began to open up in October, November of 2020, we then began to actually pump up demand. And again, where we pumped up demand is also very important because we had this very supply side approach. We did not pump up consumer demand. We went and actually spent all that money on infrastructure. Our logic was, for whatever it's worth, we're going to run up large amounts of debt for this. And it's the future generations that will have to pay for it. At the very least, we should leave behind good quality assets for them. And so our entire rebuild from the end of the 2020 was based on rebuilding through infrastructure, a process that we have continued to this day. And of course, that has not only been good for building demand, but the more important thing, it was very good for supply side. Suddenly we had better roads and better ports and other things. And the cumulative effect of that is there for all of you to see. Now, in the middle of that, we got the Delta wave came through. Now, of course, from a health perspective, that was quite painful. But notice here that we did not do a full lockdown and more or less kept the entire economy running, even despite the shock of the Delta wave. Now, many people ask us, why did the Delta wave was clearly worse than the first wave? Then why did you not do a lockdown, nationwide lockdown and Delta wave? And why did had you done the lockdown in the first round? Well, now you know, because our entire approach is based on iterative information gathering and adjustment. In the beginning, we did not have much information. We did not know what we were fighting. We did not have any testing system. We did not even have any vaccination in the pipeline. By the time the Delta wave came, we knew, for example, that children are not affected by this. We knew how to test for this. We had systems of quarantine in place. Although the vaccine program had just taken off, we knew that that vaccine program was in process. So in the next few months, people would get vaccinated. So therefore, given the iterative process by which we were moving forward, you can see that it made sense from this feedback loop-based system to not do a lockdown during Delta, even though it was much more vicious than the first wave. Now, I hope you have understood how we think about it. Now, this approach, by the way, is not unique idea to us. The IT sector, the software sector uses this all the time. They have a word for it. It's called agile. What do? They introduce a software which is 80% done, and having introduced it, they fix it they fix all the bugs retrospectively. Now I know it's a little annoying to fix them, but what it does do allows them to do is to simply fast forward and introduce changes and be able to introduce them much, much faster than if they had actually attempted to fix all the bugs in the system ex ante. Now note, this is also how we introduced the GST. We introduced the GST, which we had debated for 30 years. We had been debating the need for GST, and nobody would do it, but everybody was looking for a perfect system. Instead, we introduced it, more or less knew it would work, and then fixed all the bugs in it along the way. Again, it caused disruption, but the GST got done. Any other way, we would still have been debating it. And this is the iterative feedback loop based system through which we are doing many, many other changes. We are doing a huge number of process reforms right now using this feedback loop. We go in there, we make a few changes, see if it works, then make another change, and so on and so forth. Now, notice how this is fundamentally different in its approach than how we used to manage the economy in the past, which was through this approach of 5-year plans, which is about having an ex-ante view of what to do and then implementing it over 5 years. This, unfortunately, is, even though we've gotten rid of 5-year plans, this, unfortunately, is the default way in which government policy is made in most of the world. Basically, the idea is you create an ex-ante idea, you get it approved, you implement it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, too bad. We, on the other hand, have a completely different approach. We introduce something and then fix it afterwards through an iterative feedback loop-based system. We have no ego about being told that something doesn't work. Our view is that nothing works, it has to be made to work. And so this particular approach that we are using, again, makes it look like we are all the time doing half-baked things, but you'll be surprised how many reforms have got done. We would have been sitting wondering whether or not to do the insolvency and bankruptcy code. We would still have been debating whether or not to have a inflation targeting framework. We would still have been debating whether or not to open up the drone sector, the space sector, and etc. We don't wonder too much. We do it and then we fix it. So I hope you got a feel of a different way of thinking about this. In case you want to understand where our thinking comes from, it comes from the fact that we see the world as an uncertain, complex place that is very, very wobbly. And we are very, very suspicious of anybody attempting to carry out great predictions of how the future will be or grand plans of how the world should be. Those may work for mechanical systems. They certainly do not work for evolving organic complex systems. So that you're aware of the intellectual framework from which this entire approach derives itself. With that, let me stop, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful and engaging session. Now I would like to call upon Mukul, sir, to provide us his views as we move on to the Q&A session.
Okay. As usual, Sanjeev has provided us in relatively short time a very complex set of ideas explained in a way that is very much understandable, and he has explained them very convincingly. Sanjeev, I was just wondering if you could give some more examples of the uh, reforms that were made using this particular thinking. Maybe a couple of more examples you gave: GST, COVID, fiscal policy, and so on. Something for the external sector, maybe
So,
PLI.
yeah, PLI is also, well, PLI is also being fixed in this way. So first of all, understand what PLI is for.
Mm.
Many people try to think about PLI and try to peg on it all kinds of motivations. Let me be very, very clear what PLI is actually meant for. PLI is meant to solve one problem. And the problem is that of scale. If you go back about 3 years ago in the economic survey, we had written about India's midget problem, which is that India is very odd, that we have relatively few very large companies and a very large number of medium-sized and small companies. And in most other countries, while they do have middle-sized companies, one of the reasons they encouraged mid-sized companies was the idea that some of those mid-sized companies will graduate to becoming really large companies. But in our country, for some reason, the thinking process was that mid-sized companies are good companies, should be protected for the sake of it, not because they are a nursery from where big companies come. So if you remember, we had described the difference between a baby and a midget. Both a baby and a midget are small, but the baby grows, whereas the midget remains a midget. So the PLI scheme was meant to solve this problem in order to create the environment for allowing some of the more efficient companies and some of the areas where we wanted scale to scale up rapidly. They could be Indian companies, they could be foreign companies, it didn't matter to us. But the reason we needed them is that just to become large, because if you did not have some large companies, you simply couldn't get into this China plus one game.
Absolutely.
Right? So what we said is, okay, let's create something that does the opposite of what we have been doing all this while, which is to reward somebody who's scaling up fast. See, all this while we were actually rewarding people for remaining small. You know, you would give the small and medium-sized guys certain incentives, and if he went past a certain threshold, you actually disincentivized him. So if somebody was creating 400 jobs, if he actually said, I'm going to create 800 jobs, you'll actually disincentivize him because you'll take away all his small and medium-sized industry incentives, right? So we were going to do something quite the opposite, where you grew, we gave you more money. You invested, we gave you more money. Now, this was one, that's why the PLI was created. Now, there was another part to so how do you choose companies who do this to reward scaling up? So it's not to reward people who are already large, but people who are scaling up. Okay, so it was the delta that was to be rewarded, number one. Secondly, we also wanted something that was self-identifying, so that we did not have to do what is difficult for bureaucracies to do, is to basically choose winners. You know, bureaucracies are notoriously bad at choosing winners and champions. So there had to be something where the winner would choose itself. This happens, by the way, in Manrega, right? The very poor, in a sense, choose themselves by turning up for Manrega. So it had to be self-selecting. So these are the parameters that were used to create the PLI scheme. And we introduced it for a bunch of sectors like electronics and pharmaceuticals and textiles and so on. And the way it was created is that this self-selection also helped in another way, that if it did not succeed in some sector, we did not have to pay any money, because this money is actually given to people ex post. So if they have invested and grown, then we pay them. If they don't do anything and the PLI scheme fails, no problem. We didn't spend a cent. So this is how the PLI scheme was created. It has succeeded in some areas like electronics and pharmaceuticals. So far, it has not succeeded in other areas, at least doesn't seem to have in certain other areas. But that's okay. We will keep iterating them. We will fix here, slash there, because there is a sunset clause in all of them. This is only allowed for a few years, depending on the sector. And at the end of it, if it didn't work, it didn't work. We shut it down and carry on. And we might design a new set of policies into the future. Again, have a sunset clause, allow it to work, and then shut it down, and so on. So you can see this is basically feedback loop and adjust approach. It's the same thinking process. And the same thing, by the way, we are applying to all kinds of process reforms. So again, let me explain what this whole thing is. See, too much of the thinking that goes on about reforms in the economics field is about structural reforms. Now, people just assume that structural reforms are the only kinds of reforms that can be done. Well, if that was the case, then we wouldn't bother using the word structural to qualify the word reforms, no? The fact that structural reforms are structural reforms means that they are a special kind of reforms, which basically relates to changing the framework of the economy. So the initial stage of, for example, removing licenses, that was a structural reform because it changes the structure of the system. Insolvency and bankruptcy is a structural reform. It changes the structure of how creative destruction happens in the economy. GST is a structural reform because it basically creates a common market. Similarly, I mean, the inflation targeting framework is a structural reform. But there are other classes of reforms. So let me tell you about one class of reforms that I am particularly passionate about, and I'm doing a lot of them. And they are not yet hitting the headlines, but they are very important. And these are called process reforms. Now, process reforms are not very cool reforms because they don't try to change the framework. They are mostly boring nuts and bolts reforms. You go into a particular sector, check out the inefficiency there, change rule number 43C, subsection D, and nobody hears about it except like the 50 people who have some business in that segment. For them, it may be a very big deal, but it may not even find its way into a small note in the newspapers. And yet, in some ways, these are the big reforms that now need to be done, because in some ways, last 30 years, the structural reforms are mostly done. There may be the odd one you need to do, but by and large, they are done. We have a common market. Most of the sectors are open. Even if you need to do some more privatization, the fact of the matter is the principle of privatization is no longer debated, and so on and so forth. But the process reforms are things you need to do. Now here, let me connect it back to the feedback loop issue. Since process reforms are about fixing the nuts and bolts and so on, what matters really here is continuous feedback loops in order to manage that same. You can change something, some efficiency happens. Sometimes it may improve something and deteriorate something else. There are all kinds of unintended consequences along the way. This is not about one-time structural change. It's about continuous feedback loop changes. So not only are process reforms important, this idea of feedback loop and adjust is absolutely critical to it. This is the only way you can do it. So let me give you a whole bunch of examples of process reforms that we are doing, and you'll see how they are actually very, very important. And cumulatively, I would argue they might be even more important than structural reforms. Not any individual one, but cumulatively. So let me give you a bunch of examples of things I am currently, these are live things that we are doing. One of them was fixing India's patenting system. So India has an awful patenting system. We all talk about India, Vishwa Guru. We want to be the world's intellectual knowledge economy, capital, and so on. But the fact was that till 2016, we were only doing 9,000 patents a year. I'll repeat it, 9,000 patents a year. To put it in context, the US does 350,000 patents a year. China currently does 500,000 patents a year. Now you can argue that many of those patents are garbage utility patents, but even if you take the decent ones, they do about 1 lakh patents a year. Okay, so in that context, India was doing till just 7 years ago, 9,000 patents a year. So we began to slowly fix it. And that number has now gone up in 2022 to 33,000 patents a year. But you can see that it is still far away from everybody else. From 9,000 to 33,000 in 6 years is good, but it is still far away from the guys we want to compete with. So right now what we are doing is we are doing a massive amount of hiring. By the way, one of the areas where the government is adding hundreds of people is in patent examination and patent control. And the process is being dramatically expanded. New real estate has been allocated. All kinds of things are happening. And the process is being improved through use of AI, search machines, all kinds of things are done. The process is dramatically changed. And so we have already begun to put in that effort. And in 18 months' time, we will have the capacity to do 1 lakh patents a year. So by 2025, our capacity will be to do 1 lakh patents a year. So in less than a decade, we will have increased our patenting capability by more than 10 times. Just think about it. And we are doing it. And again, the feedback loop system is very important here. It's only when we began to expand various things that we began, because we were doing very small scale level things, we never realized what a machine of scale needed to do. And it's only when we began to expand the thing that we began to discover, oh, we don't have enough patent examiners. So we introduced patent examiners. Once we introduced patent examiners, suddenly the backlog of examination reduced, but the number of patents stuck at controller level went up. So then we fixed the controller level and so on and so forth. Then we discovered, something else got stuck. We didn't have enough, capacity to do X, Y, Z. So along the way, we discovered, yes, we have lots of great patent experts in electronic technologies, but we had almost nobody in biotech. And in fact, the electronics guys were actually doing the biotech patents. So we are hiring especially in biotech and so on and so forth. So it's an iterative process. So this is patents. I'll give you another example of a process reform. Many of you may have never heard of a law, obscure law called legal metrology. Do you even know what Legal Metrology Act is? Probably not. So it is the law that relates to weights, measures, and labels. And many people may not realize it is the single biggest source of small level graft in this country. Okay. Now again, notice what you need to do. The key thing of feedback loop and adjust is, of course, looking for data. Right? How are you getting feedback? So everybody loves macro data, GDP, national accounts, but much of process reform feedback loop is about micro level data. And when you look for it and actually begin to look for it, you will be amazed. First of all, there's lots of data, but even if there isn't any, you can pretty much create it. The solution hits you in the face as soon as you see it. So what happens in India is that the law has been set up in such a way that when you have a transgression in weights, measures, or labeling, the first transgression is fined. But the second transgression is criminalized and you can be sent to jail for as long as 7 years. Now, somebody may say that's reasonable, okay, let you off the first time, but the second time you should be sent to jail. It may seem like a reasonable thing. But let me tell you what actually happens. And this is why you need to look at data. What happens is that every year about 1 lakh of people are given notices for the first transgression. Now guess how many people get notices for the second transgression? Only 12. Why does this happen? Why do you have 1 lakh people caught for all these labels and these kinds of transgressions, but only 12 people get caught for the second one? Now, what used to happen is that the consumer affairs guys used to say, see, our laws are so good, we have criminalized it. Nobody dares to even do anything afterwards. But in fact, what happens is that we know that the number of bribes paid is about 1.2 lakhs minus 12. Because essentially what happens is that the local level inspectors are very trigger happy about basically forcing people and criminalizing them for very small transgressions. You know, your label has grams not written in full form, but just GM. Or instead of writing including, you written includes, or some completely trivial things, they'll give you a first transgression. Now you as a businessman will tell chodo, doesn't matter, let's pay him 5,000 rupees and, you know, get rid of this guy. But what has happened by doing the first transgression, you now are at the trigger of a second transgression, which can be triggered on you for the most trivial of reasons. So what will happen is that now you are a real prisoner of the local inspector for the rest of your career. And so this is how, so now what we are doing is we realize this. And so in this new bill that is there, the Jan Vishwas bill, about 1/3 of these transcriptions are being decriminalized completely. And the rest of them are also, we'll do something. So the legal retrology act provisions are all getting now decriminalized for the most part. We'll retain some amount of criminalization because there may be some situations where, you know, actual criminal behavior happens. But by and large, we are decriminalizing this whole thing. So hopefully, Professor Asher, you got a sense of how we are thinking about these reforms using this feedback loop-based system.
Thank you. There are some questions, right?
There are some questions, yeah. But meanwhile, let me ask one question to sir. Since we are talking about Amrit Kaal, and sir also mentioned about urbanization and infrastructure. So we have PM Gati Shakti and a lot of things going on. But on the part of urbanization, a lot of international scholars always cite that India is reluctant for our urbanization, or and we argue that that number is not correct. China has surpassed more than 65% of population for urbanization. So sir, how do you see the local economic development happening? Because in China, they have their SUV, they bring in investment. And in our country, states do that. So how do you see, and so you also worked on NUPF, National Urban Policy Framework. How do you see the future of our cities driving India?
So there's no question that we are going to urbanize as we rapidly grow. There's no there's no example of a non-urbanized developed country in the world. So as our per capita income grows, we will urbanize whether we like it or not. We could guide that process. We could try not to have everybody move into gigantic metropolises and try and spread it around. But no matter how the model of urbanization happens, the fact that some form of mobilization will happen is given. Unfortunately, till relatively recently, the whole thinking was that urbanization was somehow a bad thing. You know, Gandhiji said, you know, India lives in its villages, therefore we are condemned to live in our villages forever. This was the broad sense of thinking in both the bureaucracy and in the political system. And frankly, it's completely wrong. First of all, Gandhiji himself was just describing the conditions there were 100 years ago. Fact is that India has, for much of its history, been quite urban. In fact, we are the pioneers of urbanism in the Harappan period. So to say that India is somehow intrinsically rural country is ridiculous. We have gone through many cycles of urbanization and deurbanization. And the fact that in the 1920s, India was not urban was an artifact of the economic degradation that happened under colonial rule. So in fact, when the British took over India, it was actually more urban than when they left. People don't know this. Anyway, the fact of the matter is we need to do something about our urban systems. But here we again need to go back to this whole issue around feedback loops and adjust, as opposed to having the grand plan approach. Unfortunately, today, the main way in which we try to manage urbanization is through creating these gigantic master plans, which are rigid. They're almost impossible to update. And effectively, by the time a master plan comes into effect, it's already no longer correlates to anything on the ground. So effectively, what is happening is the only way our cities can actually function is by being in violation of our master plans. If we actually tried to implement any of our master plans, our cities would all have to be shut down. So it goes back to the point I made right in the beginning about this whole approach we have of ex-ante planning. Master plans are no more good for the economy than master plans are no more good for the cities as 5-year plans were for the economy, for exactly the same reason. Rigid plans cannot deal with fluid systems. So what we need to do is something like what Singapore does. Singapore does not have a master plan in the sense that India has master plans. What it does do have is a master, what they call a master plan is actually a master map. It is just a depiction of the situation as it stands. So if you go to Singapore and you go to their urban URA, Urban Redevelopment Authority, in the ground floor, there is a huge map of the entire city in meticulous detail, and it is updated every time a building comes up or is pulled down. They change it on that gigantic map. Now that is what we need to do. We need a really good map of the current situation, and then we need to keep adapting it as it evolves and try and manage the process as it really happens, not in how it looks in government documents. Otherwise, what is happening today, you have absurd situation that in the map it says that this is a public park. On the ground, actually it is a slum. And then there'll be a government budget to put some slides and some other trees and other things in the garden. So suddenly one fine morning, a whole bunch of people will turn up in the middle of the slum, plant a bunch of trees, put 2 slides and walk off. Because on paper, it is a garden. It does not matter that their place is actually a complete slum. You see, so this entire approach that we have of having wise people sitting in planning commission who know where the world is going has to be stopped. So while we have gotten rid of planning commission, the thinking process of ex-ante planning has not been evicted from our entire approach. And so we need to do something about that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So now we can take a few questions from the participants. Prajakta,
There is only about 9 minutes left. I have to carry on
Yes.
for something else. So please.
So what we'll do, we'll take a few questions together. Briefly,
Yeah.
Prajakta ji, you can unmute and ask.
Hello, Sanjeev sir. Thank you for sharing the insights of behind the scenes policy making. And continuing on the last thing that you were answering about changing the ex ante structure of bureaucracy, my question is, you stressed upon like these self-adaptive systems and like nimble systems, agile systems, and they are quite popular in EU nations, mostly because of their nimble sizes. And as soon as a policy initiative is launched, most of the public, I guess, gets aware, and there is also a public platform where they can share in their views and participate in the consultation. But what we see in India is as soon as a policy launches, there is a very long-tailed effect of disruption firsthand till the time actual benefits of that government scheme takes place. Because just because of the sheer size of the Indian population, and also because many of the beneficiaries are not even aware of what kind of government benefits have been announced. So what do you think, how we can reduce or mitigate such ripples across the marginal sections, especially because our bureaucracy is intended to be more generalist than specialist?
Thank
So
you.
first, let me say that you gave that example you gave is a dangerous one. While it is true that in European countries, a lot of local policies are done in that particular way, and it's a good thing to happen. Let me tell you, however, the European Union's downfall will be directly related to its bureaucracy. because while they have managed to retain local level policies done in this way, sadly, their macro nation, EU-wide policies are run increasingly only from Brussels and has completely lost touch with this feedback loop process. So let me tell you, far from being a good example, the European Union is very quickly going to become a poster child of rigidity as a result of precisely the problems that I have loaded you. Because to change a policy in the European Union is actually far more difficult than doing it even in India, because it needs to get all the member states have to sign up to that change. And it's almost impossible now to make those changes. So consequently, I can tell you the European Union is far more rigid than in things other than municipal issues. It is far, far more rigid. The accumulation of this problem has not yet hit critical mass, but I can see that it will in the next decade. And frankly, they have no mechanism for doing anything about it. And I can't see how they're going to get out of it. So anyway, just so that you know. Secondly, let me say that the problem in India is not that it is the bureaucracy is generalist or that it needs a specialist. So let me actually, I have a somewhat different view on this since I've worked with both specialists and generalists, and I am a specialist myself. There are some advantages to generalists and there are some advantages to specialists. Specialists tend to know their little space, but their problem tends to be that they tend to therefore know nothing about the wider system. And very often they will introduce policies that have implications for the wider system, but basically have no sense of it. So you will very often see a specialist, technocrats, or agencies like RBI or SEBI, etc. They will introduce a policy which has huge implications somewhere else in the system, but will do it nonetheless because they just don't think about these changes. It's like, if you give somebody a hammer, everything looks like a nail. On the other hand, the generalists tend to have a better sense of what it will happen on the ground. Many of them tend to have served, for example, on the ground as district magistrates or whatever it is they've done. So in fact, they very often have a better sense of what will happen on the ground, but they have no specialist knowledge of any specific thing. So I have come to the conclusion that it's very, very important to maintain a good mix between the two. If you end up with too many specialists, you will end up with complete loss of unity in overall system. Again, something that the European Union is going to face very severe problems because of, and has already begun to, one of the reasons why US policy as a macro policy has become completely dysfunctional. Because you have now, the central banks being run by people who have never ever run, they are academics who have never run actually financial institutions. And so you can see what's happening is they are yanking around policy, monetary policy in ways that is completely destroying their financial system. By the way, this is exactly what has happened in the European Union. You had bureaucrats and academics running the financial system. And as a result, they have basically really impaired permanently, in my view, the financial system of Europe. It will never recover for a long time. So I have come to the conclusion that you need to maintain some mix between specialists and generalists. The real problem, in my view, is not to allow either of those two guys to take over the controls. You need a mix, and you need a system by which the best talent from either stream should find its way to the top of the system. That is the real problem. The real problem is that we don't have a good system of getting good talent to reach the top and getting rid of the chaff along the way. Almost everybody in the system, good or bad, gets essentially promoted at roughly the same speed. And except at the very, very end, almost everybody becomes a secretary to government of India or something thereabouts. We've got to stop that. Maybe at the joint secretary level, when they're about 50 years old, we need to basically get rid of 50% and just retain the good quality guys. By the way, this something like this also happens in Singapore. I'm mentioning these Singapore examples because I have Professor Asher there who has spent a long time there. But one of the things that you find is that they have a very strict system. At 55, they force the bulk of their bureaucracy to leave. But the few who are talented are retained in the system for a very long time afterwards. And is that a good characterization, Professor Asher?
The number of elite administrative officers are only about 300 plus. So what you are describing is the elite 300 plus that run the system. The rest of the bureaucracy is on a routine basis.
Yeah, that is true everywhere.
Yeah. So that's what 300 people is their administrative elites, where they are very strict, they demote, they do things, assess it properly. And I think you need an assessment system, which we are just trying to introduce, right?
Yeah. So now you'll have to excuse me because I've come to the end of my time.
Okay.
We have a final question. If you'll suggest, I'll send it to Jyoti ma'am, or shall Tripta quickly read it, sir?
So you
Well,
can answer
read
it
one or
in-
two, but I really have to leave, and I think you also have somebody on in the.
No issue. So, Tripta, why don't you just quickly read it? Because
Sure.
as we
Just two questions, yeah. So you recently joined the NSTC panel, which will be focusing on developing syllabus learning and teaching materials for 3rd to 4th grade. As we now talk about complex decision making and iteration-based policy making, what approach needs to be adopted when we look at our education policy? This is one question. Another is about why profit-making PSUs are pipeline under investments. One question from my end, sir, with respect to feedback loops and adjustments. You mentioned that my question is, if iterations don't work, how much time do we give the reform before making alterations or rolling it back in the worst case scenario?
Well, I mean, that's a matter of judgment. There are some things where it'll be faster, somewhere it'll be not so fast. But the key is not to have any ego about the whole matter. So see what works and always retain the option of rolling back or changing and twisting. So what I'm saying is that you can actually build in certain level of flexibility into systems. I've in fact written a paper, which Professor Asher can pull off the Prime Minister's Economic Council website, on how the GST was rolled out and how whole teams of people were created for answering questions, for doing all kinds of iterations, fixing the bugs, and they still remain, by the way. And so, continuously the system is adjusted. Now, I know people criticize this, but continuous adjustment is the way to simplify systems and make them more smooth. There is no other real way of doing it. Now, of course, you don't want to do it too much beyond a point. After a couple of years, it should stabilize. But at least to some extent, even now, you will have to keep doing iterations. And as far as why profit-making PSUs are under disadvantage, well, why not? The question is not whether the PSU is making money or not. That is the irrelevant part. The question is there a good reason that a government should be running a particular, should be participating in a particular sector? Now, there are sectors where you may want a PSU, profit-making or not. For example, you want some amount of presence in the financial sector. You want some amount of presence in the defense sector. There are sectors where there will be a public sector presence for a variety of reasons. There may be strategic reasons or whatever the reason may be, or space or whatever it is. In which case, you have to be there. If the thing doesn't make profits, then please do some, the idea is to then try and manage it better and reduce those losses. But if you shouldn't be there, like for example, there is absolutely no reason why government should be in airlines. So even if Air India was a profit-making airline, I would argue that you should still privatize it. The difference will be is that you will make more money from it. That's all. The same thing is happening with LIC. We listed it. Why did we list it? It's profit making. Well, because there is no obvious reason why the Indian government should be in insurance, beyond the point anyway. At the very least, it can be a mixed, partly in state or partly public owned. On the other hand, we do intend to retain certain amount of presence in, for example, banking. So State Bank of India will always be public sector. Even if it is listed, we will maintain some public sector presence, because we know that while there are problems with public sector banks, we also know that there are problems with private sector banks. The good news is that there are different problems, different kinds of problems. So what happens is, since they are relatively uncorrelated problems, it's good to have a mixture of public and private in the banking sector. It is true, however, we do not want a sector which is 2/3 public sector. Over time, that number will go down till something like 60% will become private and 40% will remain public, but something from the public sector will still remain.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for your
Okay.
time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Learned a lot.
Bye.
Thank you, Sanjeev.
I now invite Mukul sir to give the participants an overview of the program.
And so we can also have participants introduction towards the end.
Yes, you want to do the introduction first?
No, so you can give the overview, then we can go
Sure.
for the introduction. Suvendu ji has also asked. We will have the
Okay.
mic to everyone so that we can prepare for our session starting from next week.
Okay.
We can see it, yeah. So you can try full screen.
Okay,
Yeah,
is it fine?
Perfect. Sir.
Okay. Now, the Sanjeev Sanyal was able to expand on some of the themes that we had talked about, that what we need to do in Amrit Kaal. So you have you need a fairly sophisticated, non-ideological, outcome, result-oriented policymakers who want to improve citizens' ease of living, everyday living, water, electricity, roads, connectivity, and quality of life to meet the aspirations as we grow. And that's why rigidity in ideology is counterproductive. Now here we have gotten a broad overview from my first half hour, from what Sanjeev has given so many examples of it. So all I would like to do now is to go over the topics and say a little bit about each topic, and maybe a little bit about the authors, but not much. They can be introduced later. Now note that the list of topics we have included in this program is not exhaustive, as the scope of public policy is very vast. And for example, land reform, or the some of the reforms in the forestry area, the Northeast connectivity issues, and so on, and the larger sort of political economy, media's role, civil society role, and so on. So a lot of topics, but we have to be selective. Let me make a request. Please reserve your assessment till all the topics are covered. Don't judge on today or next week or something. Wait till the end. Gather together the whole thing. You will like some part, you may not like some part. Each person will get something different depending on what they pick up, what their interests are, and what they find. And it is not necessary that you agree with all. You can have a different perspective, but the request is that the different perspective should be informed, one, data, empirical evidence, and second, should be constructive to solve the problems, not to score political points or agenda points or debating points. That's teenager stuff. Okay. Teenager means immature people do all that kind of stuff. We are at the intermediate analysis part, and we have to have mindset that we want to improve things. We may disagree, but let's improve. That's fine. And reason together, uh, that is very, very important. Okay, now today's topic you already have had. So I will, our next week is, there are two topics we are discussing. Knowing doing gap in public policies. What Sanjeev has also explained, there are a lot of things that we know, but we are not able to do it. So what are the different types of knowing doing gaps? And sometimes in knowing also, there are a lot of gaps. For example, in environment policy, scientific knowledge is very essential, but science is not agreeing on everything. And that makes you, uh, uh, that makes your mind and your attitude to be somewhat conservative, that you want to avoid the worst case scenario, as Sanjeev pointed out, uh, and you don't want to go whole hog because something is in fashion uh, to do. So Ramakrishnan and I are very good collaborators for a very long time. Um, and, and he is a management consultant, but an engineer from IIT Kanpur. So we have engineer, management consultant, a good combination. He will talk about these gaps. And I will talk about key concept in physical diagnostics. Now notice the word that I'm using is diagnose. When do we say some doctor is good? When the doctor can diagnose the problem quickly and accurately. So in fiscal also, if I want to diagnose, if I'm asked, and I've done a lot of consulting of this type, if I'm asked to go to the Ministry of Finance of Sri Lanka and say, okay, look at their fiscal system, what are the issues? Then I have to have a mental framework that says, what will I look for? What indicators? How do I diagnose? When we go to the doctor, doctor will look at our pulse, heartbeat, our eyes, our tongue, few things, and then go forward. So those are the key diagnostic tools. So we will talk about what are those tools uh, in that we need to have. This is very important because fiscal sustainability and fiscal strength is essential to manage in this turbulent world uh, where a lot of people are not very comfortable with India rising and are trying to pull India down, both within the country and outside the country. And we need to understand what sort of fiscal diagnostic tools we need to have. Then Ram will again come back and talk about citizen-centric public policy. Now, citizen-centricness is very important. Often we haven't had that. Now, under the since 2014, we do have citizen-centricness, but it's not always easy, even if your intentions are right, to have a actual policy and implementation that follows that. So this is the Ram will talk about that. And then the Sanjeev talked about GST. The Professor Mukherjee will explain this uh, in more detail because it was a huge structural change and in our thinking on the indirect taxation uh, that was introduced, and it is still undergoing some iteration. Uh, and I give lot of credit to late Shri Arun Jaitley, our former finance minister. I think without his persuasive negotiating skills with the states, GST consensus would have been difficult. So Professor Mukherjee will talk about this, or I should take out Professor, just uh, Sachidananda Mukherjee will talk about it. Then we have evolving global trade architecture and return of industrial policy that has come. The free trade where you and free market, those ideas were very powerful at one time, but now there is a understanding that global trade architecture is changing. Instead of having free trade globalization, we are now having friendly shoring, friend shoring, where the like-minded countries get together and try to do this. And the industrial policy has come back like our PLI, equivalent of that in many countries. This is going to be talked about by India's representative in Geneva at World Trade Organization. Ashish is an economist right now based in Geneva with WTO India mission. So he will be able to say something from the inside uh, on these issues uh, about international part. And external trade will play a very significant role for India. Very few know that today our external trade in goods and in services, both exports and imports, is close to $1.5 trillion. And that is approaching 40% of our GDP. Then we're talking about education and skilling initiatives. What is important now is not jobs, but livelihoods. That requires skills. So this is what I was saying before about education, behavior, motivation, skilling. And Shobit Mathur is the Vice Chancellor of Rishihood University in Sonepat, Haryana. So you would have a very interesting perspective as a Vice Chancellor on these issues. India's rise will require judicial reforms, massive way. We have a huge backlog and so on of cases. Justice delayed is justice denied. Recently, President Murmu said that some people come to me and say, oh, I won in court, but nothing is happening on the ground. So that court decision doesn't get implemented on the ground, and that is justice denied. Judicial reforms are needed. Police reforms. How do you recruit police? The crime scene is changing. Criminals are much more sophisticated now. White collar fraud is very gaining in importance. and so on. And how do you do that police and judicial? I would have liked them to be separated, but because of the choices to be made, they are together. So Prakash Singh will be talking about that. Sanjeev mentioned that we have very correctly gotten rid of the Planning Commission. So not a very constructive way to go about it. And we have Niti Aayog. Now notice what is the word Niti stand for? It's called National Institution to Transform India. Transform. It's not small incremental change, transform. Now transform is if you have ice, for example, it turns into water, but it can be turned back into ice again. That's not transformation. Okay. Transformation is that when it's changed, you cannot go back to the original. So it's much more profound. So the word Niti Aayog is chosen with lot of thinking that it is about national transformation. And Urvashi is works in Niti Aayog. So she will be able to give us an insider view of what role it can play in the Amrit Kaal. Then the India's recent policies towards financial inclusion. It's very, very important. India has had a great success. And a lot of people now want to do UPI and other transaction. Latest country is New Zealand, which has accepted UPI. Professor Aman Agarwal, runs Indian Institute of Finance. He probably is the is dean definitely, but also probably chairperson now. He's a real academic entrepreneur who has mentored a lot of young people, and India's premier finance university. Okay, so Indian Institute of Finance is where he's from. Reforming India's personal and corporate income tax. So we do need tax reform. Some of it is process reform. Some of it is structural reform, particularly in we already did indirect tax in GST. We are still running with 1961 income tax amended for that we need some changes in the direct tax code as well. Govind was the director of National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. So he's a very, very senior, respected economist. He was a member of the Finance Commission, 14th or 13th, I forget. So he also has a lot of insider view of the policies. Then the cities were talked about. The cities will have to raise a lot of their own money or some of their own money through municipal bonds, through others, and we'll have the Soumya Deep talking about a case study on municipal finance. One of the areas where we have not given enough seriousness, and this is true globally, is science and technology. A lot of misuse of science. We saw in COVID era, a lot of scientists got discredited, misuse of science. So technology, which is going to be the key for us. And we have Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan who will talk about that. Then I'll talk about the public enterprises, and a lot of other questions can be brought up there. I call it marketization of public enterprises. So you don't have to change ownership, because in economic theory, we don't have economic theory of public sector firm, economic theory of private sector firm. We just have economic theory of the firm. So how do you have market-like behavior in public enterprises without changing ownership? And I'll talk a little bit about that. Then Harsh Gupta Madhusudan and Rajiv uh, Mantri had written a book called A New Idea of India, which is based on Indian civilizational ethos. So I'm quite glad that Harsh has accepted our invitation. They have revised the edition just out, and he will explain what their civilization-based idea of India is. Key trends and issues in India's state finance. Very few people know that the states spend more proportion of total expenditure of center per state plus state, and they get more revenue than the combined. So majority is filtered through the states, but the states are not given any accountability, any responsibility, are not monitored properly. Many states legislators meet for 10 days or 15 days a year. It's really a bit disheartening to have that kind of thing. So Radhika, who is from NIPFP, she will talk about that. Then we come back to foreign policy, what that increasingly difference between domestic and foreign policy is narrowing. Okay, what we do in India affects domestically affects foreign and vice versa. So Ambassador Shashank will be talking about that. Then I'll come back again for demographic challenge with implications for livelihood, pension, and health sectors. Again, I would like to divide it up, but our schedule is tight. India's initiative for balancing sustainable environment with other goals. Now notice the title implies environment is important, it's in our interest, but it's not the only goal. In economics, you always have to have a trade-off. When you are a child, if you are asked, do you want chocolate or ice cream? You can say, I want both. And as a child, you may get it. But when you grow up, you have to choose. And you have to have a trade-off between different goals. So Anil will be talking about that and the discussion on careers in public policy by Yash Agarwal. Finally, the managing urbanization, come back to it. It's very critical by Chetan Vaidya, who was director of National Institute of Urban Affairs before. So he is a very experienced person. And then we'll talk about some of the key messages, insights. You can bring in your thinking on this in the last session. So that is the brief introduction to different topics that we are going to have. I'm stopping here. Arjun, you want to?
Yes, yes. Meanwhile, we can also take any question if any participants have. You can raise your hand or type in the Q&A box. We can do that. Then we can start with the introduction. Tripta, do you have any questions?
No, sir, none from my side.
Okay.
I just hope that you have gotten a good idea of the program, the rationale, what is coming.
Right. So shall we start with introduction by the participants? shall we start with Saurabh Patikji? Or Suvendra, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So this is Saurabh here. My name is Saurabh Patki. I am from Tata Power. I work in Bombay. I've been with Tata Power since 2011. Professor Mukul, thank you so much for the session. It was also good to hear Mr. Sanyal. And my interest in policy is because since I've been part of this energy sector and I'm part of the COPCOM team, so since energy as a topic gets reported almost every day, and there's so much happening in
Right.
energy at the global and the domestic level, it is very interesting. My interest in policy is what are the various ways of looking at aspects of this country in terms of policy, which is happening at both at the energy level and non-energy level also, and what are the various perspectives one should keep in mind or try and analyze, just so that we get a very comprehensive picture of what is happening. So from a very interest level, I think this is what what I look forward to at the end of this program for me, just to get a more comprehensive way or a more new way of pardon me, looking at things, especially in my field, energy.
Saurabh, I encourage you to actively participate in the
Sure, sir.
session and
Sure, sir.
bring your particular interest to the speaker's question and answer
For sure, sir.
attention.
For sure, sir. For sure, sir.
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir.
Good to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So we can have Suvendra next.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Professor Mukul. Thank you for enlightening us with all your insights. And thank you, Arun, for arranging this. And greetings to all the participants. My name is Suvendu Chand. I head the global consulting unit for Wipro's digital banking practice, and I'm based out of Bangalore, India. I bring about 22 decades of experience in the technology and technology domain consulting space. I have joined this course to primarily understand the impact of policy, the impact of technology in policy making, which is actually the key drivers of late that we have seen. And my specific interest, what I would look from this, series of classes is that how do we understand to create a framework of a policy making from the start, be it the technology domain, finance domain, and any other domain. Because as the new aspirants of a policy making roadmap that we are looking forward to understanding of how do we create a framework and how do we go about it actually with something which will be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. In keeping this, you would want to keep in mind the what Sanjeev said, that we live in uncertain world, and that uncertainty, that framework has to be created within that. So again, please be active in the sessions.
Okay, so we can have Nikita Talnikarji. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nikita Talnekar. I currently work as an economic consultant in a US-based consultancy firm. So I have around 4 years of work experience, and I graduated just recently in 2022. My main reason for joining this course has been stemming from the fact that I actively work on forecasting for the Indian economy for my clients as well as the global economy. So it is integral that I understand where India is heading over the next couple of decades, to ensure that I am putting out appropriate information for my clients. But overall as well, being a student of economics for so long now, seeing where we head in this Amrit Kaal, and as Mukul sir mentioned early on, we are seeing a change in our mindset as we transition to a confident society. we are definitely going to be seeing a huge boost in our economic power over the coming decades. Super excited to be here and looking forward to all the learnings over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Welcome.
You asked good question, Nikita, about what's going to happen in future.
Yeah.
Prajakta ji, you can go next.
My name is Prajakta Pradhan. I am currently a final year law student at National Law University, Lucknow, and I will be graduating in 2024. My focus has been through my entire law school life on technology, especially the disruptive tech such as AI and deep fakes. So I have joined this session specifically to learn more about what India is planning to do in the technology sector. And I'm really excited about the science, tech, and public policy session, which would be taken up by Ambassador Bhaskar. So yes, I do want to get an idea of what India's policy would be in the Amrit Kaal and what India plans to do on that. So yes, that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prajakta ji. Rahul Yadav ji, you can want to go next.
Hello everyone, I am Rahul Yadav joining from Kolkata. I have a master's in public administration and collectively I am working as a part-time faculty in political science in the Bhawanipur Gujari Education Society. I have joined this course to improve my knowledge about the broad public policy domain in India and to explore various public policy career opportunities in the country. My areas of interest are urbanization and specifically local self-governments, and I will look to explore these areas through this course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. Rohini Alok ji, you want to go next? Yes, Rohini ji.
I am Rohini and I hail from Delhi. It is a pleasure to introduce myself today to you. I hold a bachelor's and a master's degree in political science with minors in sociology. Currently, I'm pursuing, Currently, I'm pursuing my second master's in public administration. And for this course that I joined, I am currently working as a research intern in a think tank, and I'm currently writing a paper on widening tax base. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to understand how our society and economy would be working and the policy would be framing out during this whole entire Amrit Kaal, future and also the past that we have framed the policies. So thank you for having me here.
Good,
Thank
Rohini.
you.
And you have a lot to learn from Mukul sir. Mukul sir has a vast knowledge in this field. So we look forward.
It was a wonderful session today, sir. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Rohini ji. Soumya Javeri ji, you want to go next?
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Soumya Javeri and I am pursuing my bachelor's in economics from Pandit Deendayal Energy University. And I wanted to do this course to know more about public policy and learn how economics will impact how economics and public policy works together. Yeah. And gain more knowledge about public policy.
Great.
We're looking forward, Soumya ji. Shreya Pandey ji, would you like to go next? Shreya ji, yes.
Hello, good evening everyone. I am joining from Ranchi, Jharkhand, not a state that is doing very well, but I am a faculty at the Department of Political Science in Xavier's College, Ranchi. I was also a former fellow at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. So my interest, I have had a sustained interest in public policy and public administration, and I'm lucky to have been teaching papers on public policy and public administration. As already said, it was indeed a very enriching experience. The first session itself has been so good. It has really set the momentum. What I would look out for, and I think I am going to gain immensely, is one would be of course updation about my about all that I know, and updation about what are the ideas that are gaining ground and what is trending. And second of all, I think for me it would also be about ideas. I want to get an overall overall sense, and maybe gain more in terms of creativity and innovation. And just like Sanjeev sir said, that there are so many new things that are being introduced, which I also am probably not aware, and all this we do not find in the normal textbook. So really looking forward to this course. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Shad. Yeah, and keep asking good questions to all the faculties here. And next we can go to Sonal D'Souza. Sonal ji joins all of our programs. She is very regular. Sonal ji, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, good evening, Professor. And it was very great to hear Dr. Sanyal on talking about Amrit Kaal and all this policy. I'm a public policy student. I have been a development professional for the past 7 years, worked closely on a lot of other programs in public health and education. The interest stems in public policy for reasons very known. It's curiosity to know, and as a student of public policy, understanding public policy in India is very important, given the fact that India is gaining a lot of momentum in the global stage, and to understand how these policies and how geopolitical policies will impact the Amrit Kaal policy making also. So from that perspective, I have joined this course, and to get new insights, to get better understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonal
Thank
ji.
you.
And next we can go to Winona Fernandez ji.
Yes. Hi,
Yes.
everyone. My name is Winona. I'm from Mumbai. I currently work in the corporate training space, but I'm looking to move towards the impact space or impact field. And what I'm looking for with this course, similar to a lot of the participants, is one, an updation of my knowledge of public policy in India, because I do have a degree in political science, but it might not be as up to date. And also an idea of where we're going, just to be able to situate my projects in the larger context.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. Tejas Godbole ji.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Tejas.
Okay, so I'll apologize if there is any background noise, because currently I'm out of India and there could be some network issues. But just to share, I actually currently am working as a supply chain leader at Bharat Serums and Vaccines. And this was an organization which played a quite important role during the Delta wave, which Sanjeev mentioned during his introduction, wherein we are supplying quite a lot of important drugs for the COVID patients. So I have been a supply chain professional for the last 15 years, and I'm not trained essentially in public policy and political science for that matter, as a lot of the audiences have. And in certain phase of my career, I would want to actively contribute into the public policy space. And that is why I actually chose this particular course to kind of get a feel of what various specialists do in this particular field and how I can move towards that point of during my career in the next few years or so. So that is what I would strongly look forward to in the coming sessions. I know, Ashish Chandorkar is one of the panelists in this particular session, so I am connected with him. So I look forward to, learning a lot of things from many such panelists. And thank you so much to IMPRI, Mukul sir, and the others on the panel for this opportunity.
Good. Thank
Welcome.
you.
Thank you. Dr. Shruti Sharma, you come to go next. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Arjun. Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Shruti Sharma, and I am a MD postgraduate in medical sciences, and I'm currently working as a medical advisor for a healthcare MNC, and I'm based out of Gurgaon. I am a women health and economic empowerment enthusiast, and my vested interest is into the education sector to be able to achieve these imperative goals. And being from private sector healthcare representation, I want to be able to understand public policy to be able to implement impactful strategic actions in alignment with same. And also from an individual perspective, I am widely very much interested in public policy, governance, and the role of women leadership in this regard. So it gives me a good opportunity to advance, fine-tune my skills, like how Dr. Sanjeev gave wide, varied perspectives to the public policy making, like from today's session. And I really want to be, able to advance my intellectual abilities in public policy making and be able to socially and impactfully work as I progress myself ahead in the career. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Shruti. Asthaba, would you like to introduce yourself? Priyanka, Satyam?
Yes, sir, I would like to go. So myself, Priyanka Negi. I have recently graduated. I've done my master's in environmental studies from the Department of Environmental Studies in DU. I am currently a research intern at IMPRI itself. My main objective of joining this course is that, first of all, I'm an absolutely new person to the arena of public policy in itself. So this is my sort of a chance to, test the waters of public policy. I believe any field policy plays a very important role in the implementation part of any field currently in the country. And I would like to know as much as I can about it. Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you, Priyanka. Asthab, Satyam, yes.
So, sir, myself is Satyam Tripathi and I'm from Kanpur. Currently, I'm pursuing my Master's in Defense and Strategic Studies from Kanpur itself. And I've been associated with IMPRI for around an year now. And I know Professor Mukul, so I know his area of expertise. So I'm here to witness him excelling in all these and taking all that I can from him. And yes, so thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Satyam. Asthaba, would you like to go?
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm Asthaba Jadeja. I hail from Mumbai and I'm currently an undergrad student. I'm pursuing my degree in sociology and I'm also a research intern at IMPRI right now, and which is why also I'm attending this session. The course of public policy is something that I've like wanting to discover and wanting to see if I can fit myself into working there in future as well, because impact is something that has deeply interested me from the very start of my college life. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asthaba. I think we have covered everyone. Many participants have left, or in subsequent session, if anyone will be left, we'll have them to have introduced themselves. No issue. If I have missed anyone, please feel free to mention it. Okay, Rohitji has raised hand.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Hello, I am audible, sir.
Yes, you're audible. Yes.
Sir, good evening to you all, and thanks to Professor Mukul sir and Dr. Sanjeev sir, and also thank to Impact and Policy Research Institute for giving me chance to attend the public policy in India in the Amrit Kaal. Sir, myself is Gulabhai Rohit from Union Territory of Dadra and Nagar Haveli. I am a BCom, MCom, MBA, CA Inter, Indian Administrative Laws and certificate courses in corporate finance, corporate governance, import-export management, BRSR and ESG. Sir, I am practicing as an income tax practitioner since last 25 years in the Dadra and Nagar Haveli, and my working area are accounting, auditing, taxation, direct and indirect, and management consultancy. Sir, I am also a social activist, just a plantation, healthcare, public issues raised before government authorities, blood donation camp, and also, sir, I am a independent director and chairman of audit committee and finance committee in the Shipping Corporations of India Limited, Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways, Government of India. Sir, also I am a politician. I am a BJP Vice President in the Dadra and Nagar Haveli. Sir, thankful for giving me chances to join this program. I want to know about public policy in India and how to implement in the state level also. It will be helpful to me for my bright future. Thank you all, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gulabhai sir. And with your so much of experience, do ask questions, because we are going to have technical sessions, so we will also learn from you. Lastly,
Okay, sir.
Yes, welcome. If we look forward.
Sir,
Lastly,
it is a new subject for me. I also learn about various courses as a corporate governance, corporate finance, but this is a new subject and I want to learn for my better career. Public policy in India in the Amrit Kaal, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav.
yes, of course. And Mukul sir has designed and directed this course so that we all can learn and into this newer dimension. Lastly, I would invite Tripta to introduce herself. Tripta will host the program. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tripta Behra. I'm a research intern, now an assistant editor also at IMPRI. I've been associated with them for more than a year now. I completed my graduation from the Shriram College of Commerce in the subject economics. I will be pursuing a master's in economics this fall from JNU. So that's about my background, education background. With respect to research interests, I would like to explore the avenue of public policy in India, which is why I think this course explores the various facets of public policy, which is why I think it will be very helpful for those of us interested in this arena. So thank you so much for your time, all of you today. I would like to go ahead with the vote of thanks.
Or if Mukul sir would like to give any concluding remarks.
Sure, sir. Sure.
No, I think it's fine.
We have a very good bunch of participants.
Yes, excellent.
Going to be
excellent.
And we have a very nice panelists, and all will be prepared. So we look forward for this very exciting course. So Tripta, yes, you can go ahead with the vote of thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So as we come to an end of day one of a 1 month immersive online intermediate certificate training course on contours of public policy in India in the Amrit Kaal, I, Tripta Behra, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for day one of this course, Professor Mukul and Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, for taking out their valuable time and giving an opportunity to the participants to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you next Friday, that is 8th September at 6 p.m. for our second day of the certification course by distinguished experts, Mr. V. Ramakrishnan and Professor Mukul. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mukul sir. Thank you, everyone. We look forward. Have a good
Thank
night.
you, sir. Good evening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, I want more learn about public policy.
First, this is a very immersive course. Let us try to catch up with this. Then we can discuss more about it.
Okay,
And
sir.
there is a lot of materials available on our YouTube, on our website. You can go through them. It's
Okay, sir.
very, very rich material, very immersive. If you see, a lot of material are there. There are many thematic playlists on our YouTube channel. You can look into them. Almost all the top experts are talking onto the cutting edge issues. So that will be a good learning.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.